guest, we've asked Monroe's random ask question just to try to get some background into the people, which really has stopped being random. I almost should not call it random. It's Monroe's slightly random question targeted towards people. But
It's a mouthful, though. That's
yeah,
wordy.
random question is better. But I'm asking, especially two intellectual people, because I know mine's probably going to be different. What's your favorite book? Part of this is I just like Cofield's answers, and I love to make fun of him, but I won't make fun of you in front of you.
Oh man, does it have to be restricted to a category?
You could
No.
go
Oh man,
whatever you want.
I'm put on the spot with my favorite book.
I'll
I
start.
could, oh, yeah.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I got one. So you can cook for a little bit if you like.
Probably like a operation manual on a M1 Abrams tank or something.
Okay, I have a hard time reading fiction, and so I've had some fiction books that I really enjoyed. I enjoyed reading Dune, but that's about one of 4 fiction books that I've ever actually got all the way through. When I was a young guy, I was in a real deep existential crisis, and like many young men in deep existential crisis, I turned to the study of philosophy, right? And everybody
That's what I
knows.
did.
But I quickly got very frustrated because most of the things that they talked about seemed like nonsense to me. And then as I tried reading more and more and more, I eventually read 2 things that I felt really important for me to read. One was The Tracticus by Ludwig Wittgenstein. Yeah.
One of my favorite Ludwigs.
One of my favorite Ludwigs. So there's a lot of goods and maybe not so goods in that, but one of the pieces that he talked about was that a lot of the philosophical conundrums that we have are just bad questions. They're what do you call manufactured through weaknesses in language. And so when you ask somebody like what's the meaning of life, you're actually asking them a silly question because life means that you reproduce and you consume food and you respond to your environment. Like we know what those things are, right? So the real you have to get towards asking better questions or even coming up with a syntax that allows you to ask perfect questions, right? And so
Now
you like
you're a podcast host.
Yeah, a better question might be like, what is the purpose of life? Or what is the purpose of my life, right? Like those might be better questions than what is the meaning of life. Even though like we all understand what you're getting at when you say the meaning of life, by asking inaccurate questions, you're going to get inaccurate answers, right? And so that was really useful for me.
What was the title?
Tracticus.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And then the other one was Kurt Gödel's incompleteness theorem. So he was a mathematician and logician, and the incompleteness theorem was basically just the idea that a system can't be self-defining and be consistent. So I'll move on from that.
Mine was Stephen King's The Stand.
Nice.
It was my favorite book. It took me 2 times to read it. I tried once in Afghanistan and chucked it into the desert.
Yeah.
And then when I got home, I fully read it.
So there's just an English copy of The Stand in the
sitting
desert somewhere
desert
in Afghanistan.
Yes, there is. Absolutely.
Nice.
But
I might wake him up a little bit. I'm a huge philosophical nerd, so yeah, Kurt Gödel basically broke math for a while till they came up with it, and then Wittgenstein. I think the end thing was the limits of my knowledge or the limits of my language, right?
Yep.
Isn't that what his end proposition from that book
Essentially, yeah.
was? So yeah, those were some big name people in each of those fields. So you picked 2 different books and in 2 different fields. So my favorite fiction book is going to be The Lord of the Rings, right?
Okay.
So if
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
going to pick a book, I think that's one of the greatest pieces of literature that's been developed. And you got The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. I know they're separate. There's like 4 books there, but that would be my favorite. If I have to go from philosophy, I would go with The Myth of Sisyphus from Albert Camus.
Yeah.
And basically, he wrestles with the most important question is, should you commit suicide or not?
Yeah.
He starts off the beginning of the book with a very profound statement. Should I kill myself or should I have another cup of coffee? And then he answers the question through the book. So I won't ruin the end of the book, but the basic premise of the whole book of The Myth of Sisyphus is, while there is no inherent point to life, you should carry on anyways and fight against it and become an absurd hero.
Yeah.
And so it's a great book. He does like a long, drawn-out argument for why you should not kill yourself.
Yeah.
So that's my philosophical book. And then recently, a book that I just read on leadership that I really liked was the book Endurance about Ernest Shackleton, and really about pushing through a very difficult time. So if you've ever heard of this story, he was trying to get to the South Pole to be the first person. He sailed a ship down from England, and it got stuck in the ice, and then he had to get back and save all his men. So there was a lot of people on the boat. He was at the helm, and it's this huge story of how he got back and saved his men from the journey. And there's a lot of take-homes with number one, the ego, being too egoistic in the book, and then enduring through that, and being a part of a greater group, and then saving these people. So those are my books that you asked about. I went with more than one just because I love so many books.
Yeah, that's fair. That's good.
That's why I went with books. I knew that. I just love the difference.
Uh-huh.
Like, I knew that was going to... that wasn't the random question. I'll just use that on a different one. But I was like, you know what? Best book is going to hit this group right now.
Yeah.
There's some philosophy in The Stand. King might have been on a lot of drugs.
I haven't
when
read
he
it.
wrote it,
I
but
don't do a lot of fiction.
It's
Only
a good book.
nonfiction.
maybe it's nonfiction. You don't know.
Oh, maybe. I should get into it and find out. Stephen King's written a lot of...
I mean, it's the apocalypse, so it didn't happen. But all right, there's your transition.